I found out my generator had been reported stolen when two police officers knocked on my door at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. I stood there in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, staring at the two uniformed officers on my doorstep. The older one, a stocky man with graying temples, cleared his throat and asked if I was Derek O'Brien. I confirmed that I was, my mind racing through possibilities of what could have brought them here. Had there been a break-in I didn't know about? Was someone hurt? "Sir, we received a report that you're in possession of stolen property," the younger officer said, consulting his notepad. "Specifically, a portable generator." I actually laughed. It was such an absurd statement that I couldn't help it. My generator. Someone reported my generator as stolen. "Yes, sir." "Do you own a Honda EU 2200i portable generator?" "I do. I bought it 3 months ago from Home Depot. I have the receipt inside if you want to see it." The officers exchanged glances. The older one sighed, and I could tell this wasn't the first time they'd dealt with something like this. "We'd appreciate that, Mr. O'Brien. Mind if we take a look at the generator as well?" I invited them in, still bewildered by the entire situation. My house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home in the Sunset Ridge community, a development that had sprung up about 5 years ago. I'd moved in 18 months prior, and for the most part, things had been peaceful. Well, except for the HOA president, Karen Mitchell, who seemed to take personal offense to every minor infraction she could find. I led the officers through my house to the garage, where my generator sat on a metal shelf alongside my other tools and equipment. It was exactly where I'd left it after the last power outage we'd had during monsoon season. The machine was in perfect condition, still had the slight smell of fresh gasoline from when I'd tested it a few weeks back. "There it is," I said, gesturing to the red and black machine. "Serial number should match the receipt." I went back inside and rummaged through my filing cabinet where I kept important documents. I'd learned early in life to save receipts for expensive purchases, and this generator had set me back nearly $1,000. I found the receipt from Home Depot, dated 3 months prior, and brought it back to the garage. The older officer examined the receipt, then checked the serial number on the generator. They matched perfectly. He handed the receipt back to me and closed his notepad. "Mr. O'Brien, do you have any idea who might have reported this as stolen?" "I have a pretty good guess," I said. "My HOA president, Karen Mitchell. She lives 3 houses down. We've had some disagreements lately." The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "What kind of disagreements?" I explained that Karen had been on my case about various things over the past few months. First, it was my lawn being a 1/4 inch too long according to HOA standards. Then it was the color of my mailbox, which she claimed didn't match the approved color palette, even though it was the exact same shade as every other mailbox on the street. Most recently, she'd complained about me running my generator during a power outage at night, claiming it violated noise ordinances, even though half the neighborhood was doing the same thing. "So you think this is retaliation?" the older officer asked. "I don't know what else it could be. Nobody else has had any issues with my generator, and it's obviously not stolen." The officers thanked me for my cooperation and said they'd follow up on the false report. After they left, I stood in my driveway, watching them drive away, feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. Filing a false police report was a serious matter, and Karen had just wasted everyone's time over what was clearly a personal grudge. I went back inside and called my friend Marcus, who worked as a paralegal at a law firm downtown. I'd known Marcus since college, and he'd always been my go-to person for legal questions. "Marcus, someone just filed a false police report against me," I said when he answered. Slow down. What happened? I explained the entire situation from the police visit to my suspicions about Karen. Marcus listened quietly, and I could hear him typing in the background, probably taking notes. That's defamation, Derek. If she knowingly filed a false report claiming your property was stolen, and you can prove she knew it wasn't stolen, you might have grounds for a lawsuit. Seriously. Yeah, man. False reports like that can damage your reputation, cause emotional distress, and waste your time dealing with police. You might want to talk to a lawyer about it. After hanging up with Marcus, I spent the rest of the morning researching defamation law in Arizona. I learned that defamation came in two forms: libel, which was written, and slander, which was spoken. Filing a false police report could potentially fall under either category, depending on how it was reported. The key elements were that the statement had to be false. It had to be made to a third party. It had to cause harm to the victim's reputation, and it had to be made with some level of fault. In Arizona, private figures like myself had to prove that the defendant acted negligently, while public figures had to prove actual malice. Since I was just a regular guy, I'd need to show that Karen either knew her statement was false or acted with reckless disregard for the truth. I decided to wait and see what the police would do with the information I'd given them. In the meantime, I needed to document everything. I took photos of my generator, made copies of the receipt, and started a timeline of all my interactions with Karen over the past few months. 2 days later, I received a call from the older police officer who'd come to my house. His name was Officer Rodriguez, and he sounded apologetic. Mr. O'Brien, I wanted to update you on the false report situation. We spoke with Mrs. Mitchell, and she claims she saw someone loading a generator into your garage late at night and assumed it was stolen property. That doesn't make any sense, I said. I've had that generator for 3 months. Why would she suddenly report it now? She claims she only recently noticed it and became suspicious. She said she was trying to be a good neighbor and watch out for the community. I felt my blood pressure rising. Officer Rodriguez, she's lying. She complained about me running that generator during the last power outage. She knew I owned it. This is harassment. I understand your frustration, Mr. O'Brien. Unfortunately, Mrs. Mitchell maintains she was acting in good faith, and it's difficult to prove otherwise. We've issued her a warning about filing reports without sufficient evidence, but that's about all we can do from our end. After the call ended, I sat on my couch, staring at the wall. A warning. That was it. Karen had filed a false police report, sent officers to my house, potentially damaged my reputation, and all she got was a warning. It felt like a slap in the face. I called Marcus again. They're not going to do anything about it, I told him. She claims she thought it was stolen, and they can't prove otherwise. Then you need to sue her, Marcus said without hesitation. Look, I can connect you with an attorney who specializes in defamation cases. This is exactly the kind of situation where a civil suit makes sense. She made a false statement to the police. It caused you harm, and she did it either knowing it was false or with reckless disregard for the truth. What kind of harm, though? The police came to my door, we cleared it up, and that was it. Derek, she accused you of possessing stolen property. That's a criminal allegation. Even if the police cleared you, that accusation is now part of the record. If you ever need a background check for a job or anything else, this incident could come up. Plus, there's the emotional distress of having police show up at your house accusing you of a crime. And what about your neighbors? If she told anyone else about this, your reputation in the community could be damaged. That last point hit hard. I didn't know if Karen had told other neighbors about her suspicions. For all I knew, half the people on my street thought I was a thief. Marcus gave me the name of an attorney, Sandra Williams, who had experience with defamation cases. I called her office that afternoon and managed to schedule a consultation for the following week. In the meantime, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I wanted to know if Karen had told anyone else about her accusations. I started with my next-door neighbor, Bill Henderson, a retired accountant who spent most of his time gardening. I found him outside trimming his hedges on Saturday morning. We exchanged pleasantries, and then I casually brought up the police visit. "Oh yeah, I saw the cops at your place," Bill said. "Everything okay, just a misunderstanding. Someone reported my generator as stolen, but I had the receipt and everything was fine." Bill's face darkened. "Let me guess. Karen Mitchell. How'd you know?" "Because she told me she was going to report it. I was out getting my mail when she walked by about a week ago. She started going on about how she'd seen suspicious activity at your place, someone moving a generator around late at night. I told her she should talk to you first before calling the police, but she said she had a responsibility to protect the neighborhood." My jaw clenched. So she had told at least one other person, and she'd done it before even filing the report. This wasn't just a mistaken assumption. She'd been planning this. "Did she say anything else?" I asked. "Just that she thought you might be involved in something shady. I didn't pay much attention to it, honestly. Karen's always worked up about something." I thanked Bill and headed back inside. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that Karen had knowingly filed a false report. She'd seen me using the generator during the power outage. She knew I owned it. Yet she told a neighbor I was suspicious, and then called the police claiming it was stolen. My consultation with Sandra Williams was enlightening. She was a sharp woman in her early 40s with a no-nonsense attitude. I sat in her office in downtown Phoenix, a modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and laid out everything that had happened. Sandra took notes and asked pointed questions. How long had I owned the generator? Had I used it in public view? What exactly had Karen said to the police? Had she told anyone else? Could I prove she knew the generator was mine? "The key here is proving she acted with fault," Sandra explained. "In Arizona, for a private figure defamation case, we need to show she was at least negligent. Given what you've told me, we can argue she was actually reckless or even acted with actual knowledge of falsity. She'd seen you with the generator before. She complained about it during the power outage. Then she told your neighbor she thought you were suspicious and filed a police report claiming it was stolen. So I have a case. You have a strong case. The question is whether it's worth pursuing. Defamation cases can be expensive and time-consuming. However, in situations like this where the defendant's actions were particularly egregious, we can sometimes settle quickly. The threat of a lawsuit alone might be enough to get her to back down and compensate you for the harm caused." "What kind of compensation are we talking about?" "In defamation cases, you can seek compensatory damages for actual harm, like damage to reputation, emotional distress, and any financial losses. You can also seek punitive damages if we can show her conduct was especially malicious. Given the facts here, I think we could realistically seek $10,000 to $15,000, maybe more if she's been telling a lot of people about this." I thought about it for a moment. $10,000 seemed like a lot for what had happened, but Sandra was right that Karen's actions had been malicious. She deliberately tried to make me look like a criminal. "Let's do it," I said. Sandra nodded. "I'll draft a demand letter first. We'll lay out the facts, explain the legal basis for the claim, and demand compensation and a formal apology. Sometimes that's enough to resolve these matters without going to court. If she refuses, we'll file a lawsuit." Over the next week, Sandra prepared the demand letter. It was a detailed document that outlined every aspect of what had happened, including the police visit, Karen's prior knowledge of my generator, her statements to Bill Henderson, and the harm caused by her false accusation. The letter demanded $10,000 in damages and a written apology to be distributed to all residents in the HOA community. The letter was sent via certified mail to ensure Karen received it. Then we waited. I tried to go about my normal life, but it was difficult. Every time I saw Karen's house, I felt a surge of anger. I avoided going outside when her car was in the driveway, not wanting to risk a confrontation. The whole situation had turned my peaceful neighborhood into a source of stress. About 10 days after the demand letter was sent, Sandra called me. "She responded," Sandra said, "and she's not backing down. Her response basically says she did nothing wrong, that she was acting as a concerned citizen, and that you're trying to intimidate her for doing her civic duty." "You're kidding." I wish I was. Her response also includes a counter threat. She's claiming that if you proceed with the lawsuit, she'll file a complaint with the HOA for harassment and seek to have you fined. I actually laughed at that. She files a false police report, and I'm the one harassing her. Classic Darvo. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. It's a common tactic, but it's not going to work here. We have the evidence on our side. I recommend we proceed with filing the lawsuit. Do it. Sandra filed the complaint in Maricopa County Superior Court. The lawsuit named Karen Mitchell as the defendant and laid out causes of action for defamation per se and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Defamation per se meant that the false statement was so obviously harmful that we didn't need to prove specific damages. Accusing someone of a crime fell squarely into that category. Karen was served with the lawsuit papers about a week later. I wasn't there to see her reaction, but I heard about it from Bill Henderson, who'd witnessed the process server handing her the documents. "She turned bright red and started yelling at the guy," Bill told me. "Said something about how this was all a witch hunt and that you were trying to destroy her reputation. The process server just handed her the papers and left." The lawsuit kicked off a flurry of activity. Karen hired an attorney, a man named Robert Crane, who worked for a firm that specialized in HOA disputes. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd hired an HOA attorney for a defamation case. Crane filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that Karen's report to the police was protected speech and that she had qualified privilege as an HOA president to report suspected crimes. Sandra countered with a response arguing that qualified privilege didn't apply when the speaker acted with malice or reckless disregard for the truth, which Karen clearly had. The judge denied the motion to dismiss. That was our first victory. Discovery began shortly after. This was the process where both sides could request documents and information from each other. Sandra subpoenaed the police report from the incident, Karen's HOA records, and any communications she'd had about me or the generator. We also sent interrogatories, written questions that Karen had to answer under oath. Karen's responses to the interrogatories were revealing. She claimed she'd first noticed the generator in my garage 2 weeks before filing the police report. When asked why she didn't speak to me directly, she said she felt it would be inappropriate to confront someone potentially involved in criminal activity. When asked about her prior complaints about generator noise, she said she didn't remember complaining specifically about my generator and thought the noise could have come from any of several houses. It was clear she was lying, but proving it would require witness testimony. We also subpoenaed Karen's phone records and emails. This was where things got interesting. Sandra's paralegal discovered a text message exchange between Karen and another HOA board member, a woman named Patricia Jennings, sent 3 days before Karen filed the police report. The exchange read, "Karen, that O'Brien guy is at it again with his stupid generator. I swear he's doing it just to annoy me. Patricia, can't you fine him or something? Karen, already tried. He showed me the HOA bylaws say generators are allowed during power outages. He's such a smartass." Patricia, so what are you going to do, Karen? I'm thinking about calling the cops. Say I saw someone suspicious with a generator late at night. Let them deal with him. Patricia, would that work, Karen? Worth a shot. Maybe it'll scare him into being more respectful. When Sandra showed me those text messages, I couldn't believe it. Karen had literally planned the false report in writing. She'd admitted she wanted to use the police to harass me because she was annoyed. This was exactly the kind of evidence we needed. "This is smoking gun material," Sandra said. She admitted she was going to file a false report before she did it. That shows actual malice. We can use this to argue for punitive damages. We also deposed several witnesses. Bill Henderson testified about Karen's conversation with him where she'd called me suspicious. Another neighbor, Angela Stewart, testified that Karen had mentioned at an HOA meeting that she thought I was trouble and didn't belong in the neighborhood. A third neighbor testified that Karen had told them I was under police investigation for stolen property, which was completely false since I'd been cleared immediately. The depositions painted a picture of Karen as someone who'd launched a deliberate campaign to damage my reputation. She hadn't just made a single mistake. She'd repeatedly made false statements to multiple people. Karen's own deposition was a disaster for her case. Sandra pressed her on the text messages, and Karen tried to claim they were taken out of context. When asked what context would make planning a false police report acceptable, she became flustered and defensive. She insisted she really had believed the generator might be stolen, but when Sandra pointed out her text message said she knew it was mine, Karen claimed she'd been confused. "Confused about what?" Sandra asked. "I don't know. I was upset. I say things when I'm upset." "So you didn't really think the generator was stolen?" "I thought it might be." "But your text message says you knew it was his generator. You called it his stupid generator. Those were your words." Karen's attorney objected, but the damage was done. Karen had effectively admitted she knew the generator was mine when she filed the report. The case was scheduled for trial 6 months after I'd first filed the lawsuit. During that time, the atmosphere in the neighborhood became increasingly tense. Karen stopped attending HOA meetings, and Patricia Jennings took over most of the HOA president duties. Several neighbors approached me privately to express their support, saying they were glad someone was finally standing up to Karen's bullying behavior. I also learned that I wasn't the first person Karen had targeted. Another resident, a man named Tom Ramirez, told me that Karen had threatened to report his daughter's car as abandoned when it sat in the driveway for more than 3 days. The daughter was away at college and only used the car on breaks. Tom had been intimidated into moving the car to storage, costing him money every month just to avoid Karen's threats. A week before trial, Sandra called with news. Karen's attorney reached out. "They want to settle." "Really?" "Yeah. They've seen the evidence, and they know they're going to lose at trial. Crane suggested they're willing to pay $7,000 and issue a written apology." "No deal," I said immediately. "We asked for $10,000 and that's what I want, and not just a written apology." "I want her to resign from the HOA." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "I can push for the full $10,000. The resignation demand might be harder. That's not something we can necessarily force through a lawsuit." "Then let's go to trial. The jury will see those text messages." They'll know exactly what she did. Sandra conveyed my response to Karen's attorney. 2 days later, they came back with a new offer, $9,000, a written apology, and Karen agreeing to step down from her position as HOA president within 30 days. "I think we should take it," Sandra advised. "Going to trial always carries risk, even with strong evidence. 9,000 is close to what we asked for, and getting her to resign from the HOA addresses the root problem." I thought about it carefully. The principle of the matter was important to me. Karen had tried to ruin my reputation and had shown no remorse. At the same time, Sandra was right that trial was risky. Juries could be unpredictable. "Counter at 10,000, apology and resignation," I said. "If she agrees, we settle. If not, we go to trial." Sandra made the counter-offer. That evening, she called me back. They agreed. $10,000, written apology to be distributed to all HOA residents, and resignation from the HOA board within 30 days. "We'll draft a settlement agreement and have both parties sign." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't just about the money, though $10,000 was nothing to sneeze at. It was about holding Karen accountable for what she'd done and making sure she couldn't do it to anyone else. The settlement agreement was signed a week later. Karen's attorney handed over a cashier's check for $10,000, and Sandra took her contingency fee of 30%, which left me with $7,000. Karen also signed the written apology, which read, "I, Karen Mitchell, apologize to Derek O'Brien for filing a false police report regarding his generator. I made serious and unfounded allegations that caused harm to Mr. O'Brien's reputation and caused him unnecessary stress and expense. I acknowledge that my actions were wrong and that I had no reasonable basis to believe Mr. O'Brien's generator was stolen property. I deeply regret my actions and apologize to Mr. O'Brien and the entire Sunset Ridge community." The apology was distributed to every household in the HOA via email and physical mail. Karen resigned from the HOA board 3 weeks later, and Patricia Jennings was elected as the new president in an emergency election. The aftermath of the settlement was almost as satisfying as the settlement itself. Neighbors who'd been afraid to speak up against Karen suddenly felt empowered. At the next HOA meeting, several residents brought up concerns about how Karen had been running things, and Patricia promised to implement changes. The HOA bylaws were revised to include clearer procedures for complaints and to prevent any single person from having too much unilateral power. Bill Henderson told me he'd heard through the grapevine that Karen was planning to sell her house and move out of the neighborhood. I didn't feel bad about that. Actions had consequences, and she'd brought this on herself. I used part of the settlement money to buy a new riding lawnmower, the kind that made it impossible for my lawn to ever be a 1/4 inch too long. I also installed a small garden in my front yard, choosing plants from the HOA's approved list just to be safe. Not because I was afraid of complaints, but because I wanted to show that I was a good neighbor who followed reasonable rules. The police report incident was eventually expunged from the record after Sandra filed a motion explaining the circumstances. That meant if anyone ever ran a background check on me, they wouldn't see any reference to stolen property allegations. Life slowly returned to normal. The stress that had been hanging over me for months finally lifted. I could walk outside without feeling angry or anxious. I could use my generator during power outages without worrying about complaints. Most importantly, I'd stood up for myself and won. About 3 months after the settlement, I was outside washing my car when Patricia Jennings walked by with her dog. She stopped to chat. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" for doing what you did with Karen. I know it probably wasn't easy, but you exposed some serious problems with how she was operating. The HOA is much better now. We actually work together to solve problems instead of looking for ways to fine people." "I'm glad something good came out of it," I said. "A lot of good came out of it. We've had 3 new families move in since then, and they all commented on how welcoming the neighborhood is. That wouldn't have happened under Karen's watch." Patricia's words meant a lot. I hadn't set out to reform the HOA or change the neighborhood culture. I just wanted to hold someone accountable for a malicious lie. But in doing so, I'd apparently helped create a better community for everyone. Marcus stopped by one weekend with a 6-pack of beer to celebrate. We sat on my back patio, enjoying the Arizona weather, and talked about everything that had happened. "You know what the best part is," Marcus said. "You proved that bullies can be held accountable. Karen thought she could get away with whatever she wanted because she had a little bit of power. You showed her that power comes with responsibility." "I just didn't want her to get away with lying," I said. "And that's exactly why you won. You had the moral high ground, the evidence, and the determination to see it through. A lot of people would have just let it go." "I thought about letting it go," I admitted. "But then I realized that if I did, she'd just do it to someone else. Maybe the next person wouldn't have a receipt. Maybe they'd actually get in trouble for something they didn't do. You did the right thing, man." We clinked our beer bottles together, and I looked out at my backyard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. My generator sat in the garage, ready for the next power outage. Everything was as it should be. I thought back to that morning when the police had knocked on my door, how confused and angry I'd felt. I'd never imagined that a simple generator could lead to a lawsuit, thousands of dollars, and a complete change in how my HOA operated. Life was strange that way. Sometimes the smallest things became the biggest battles. But I'd learned something important through all of this. Standing up for yourself mattered. Not in an aggressive or vindictive way, but in a measured, principled way. I'd used the legal system exactly as it was designed to be used, to remedy a wrong and hold someone accountable. The $10,000 was nice, but the real victory was knowing that I'd defended my reputation and helped create a better community in the process. Karen's house went up for sale 2 weeks later. I saw the realtor's sign go up one morning as I was leaving for work. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt, wondering if I'd driven her out of the neighborhood. But then I remembered the text messages, the false police report, the lies she'd told to neighbors. I remembered how she tried to intimidate me, to use her position of power to make my life miserable over petty grievances. No, I decided. I hadn't driven her out. Her own actions had done that. I'd simply refused to be her victim. The house sold within a month to a young couple with a baby. I introduced myself the day they moved in, helping them carry boxes and answering questions about the neighborhood. They were friendly, excited about their new home, and seemed like they'd be good neighbors. "How's the HOA here?" the husband, Jason, asked as we took a break from moving boxes. "Much better than it used to be," I said. "The new president actually works with residents instead of against them." "That's good to hear." We looked at a couple other neighborhoods, but the HOAs seemed really strict. I almost told him about what had happened with Karen, but decided against it. That was in the past now, and there was no point in starting their experience in the neighborhood with drama. "Just follow the rules, take care of your property, and you'll be fine," I said. As the months went by, the incident faded from daily conversation. The neighborhood settled into a comfortable rhythm. The HOA meetings became productive sessions where residents actually discussed community improvements rather than arguing about minor violations. Patricia proved to be an excellent president. fair-minded and reasonable. I kept the settlement check stub framed in my office as a reminder. Not as a trophy, but as a symbol of what could be accomplished when you stood up for what was right. $10,000 for defending my reputation and holding a bully accountable. It seemed almost poetic. My generator continued to serve me well during the monsoon season power outages. Each time I fired it up, I thought about the absurdity of what it had caused. A machine designed to provide backup power had ended up powering a legal battle that changed my entire community. One evening, about 6 months after the settlement, I ran into Tom Ramirez at the grocery store. He was the neighbor who told me about Karen threatening to report his daughter's car. "Hey, Derek, I wanted you to know something," Tom said. "My daughter's home for the summer and her car's been in the driveway for 2 weeks. Nobody said a word about it." "That's how it should be," I said. "Yeah, but it made me think. I spent almost $1,000 on storage fees for that car over 2 years because I was too scared to stand up to Karen. You weren't scared. You fought back and won. That inspired me." "What did you do?" "I filed a small claims case against the HOA for the storage fees. Argued that Karen's threats were harassment and that I'd incurred costs because of her abuse of power. We settled last week. The HOA paid me $1,200. I was stunned. That's fantastic. It wouldn't have happened without your example. You showed us we didn't have to just accept bullying behavior." Tom's words stayed with me. I'd never thought of myself as inspiring anyone. I'd just been trying to defend myself and my reputation. But apparently, my willingness to stand up to Karen had encouraged others to do the same. The following month, the HOA held its annual meeting. I attended, something I'd rarely done before all this happened. Patricia presented a budget that included funds for community events, better landscaping, and improvements to the neighborhood park. The atmosphere was collaborative, with residents offering suggestions and the board actually listening. During the open forum portion, a newer resident raised her hand. "I just want to say that this is the friendliest HOA I've ever been part of," she said. "My last neighborhood was so contentious. This feels like an actual community." Several people nodded in agreement. Patricia smiled and said, "We've worked hard to create that atmosphere. We believe an HOA should enhance the neighborhood, not make residents feel like they're constantly being watched for violations." After the meeting, several neighbors thanked me privately for what I'd done with the lawsuit. Apparently, word had spread beyond just those who'd received the apology letter. People knew that I'd held Karen accountable, and they appreciated it. "You changed things around here," one elderly resident told me. Before, people were afraid to even talk to each other because they thought Karen might report them for loitering or something ridiculous. Now we have block parties and neighborhood barbecues. It's like a different place. I drove home that night feeling content. The whole ordeal had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. But it had been worth it. Not just for the money, though $7,000 after legal fees wasn't something to dismiss, but because I'd helped transform a toxic environment into a healthy one. My generator sat in the garage, silent now that we were between storm seasons. I looked at it and chuckled. Such a simple machine had been the catalyst for so much change. Karen had tried to use it as a weapon against me, to turn something innocent into evidence of criminal activity. Instead, her false accusation had exposed her own misconduct and led to her downfall. There was a lesson in that, I thought. When you try to destroy someone based on lies, you often end up destroying yourself. The truth has a way of coming out, and justice, while sometimes slow, usually prevails. I thought about what I'd learned through this experience. First, documentation was crucial. If I hadn't kept that receipt, If I hadn't been able to prove I'd purchased the generator legally, things could have gone very differently. Second, standing up for yourself didn't mean being aggressive or vindictive. It meant using the appropriate channels, following the rules, and letting the system work. Third, bullies often crumbled when confronted with consequences. Karen had been so used to intimidating people that she'd never expected someone to actually fight back with a lawsuit. The legal system, for all its flaws, had worked exactly as it should. I'd filed a legitimate claim, provided evidence, and received a fair judgment. Sandra had been an excellent attorney, guiding me through the process and helping me understand my options. The judge had been impartial and fair. Even Karen's attorney, though defending his client, had been professional throughout. I also thought about Karen herself. I didn't hate her, despite everything she'd done. I actually felt a bit sorry for her. She'd been so consumed with controlling the neighborhood and asserting her authority that she'd lost sight of basic decency. Her need to be right, to be in charge, to punish anyone who didn't defer to her had ultimately cost her $10,000, her position in the HOA and her home. What drove someone to behave that way? I'd wondered about it often. Maybe she felt powerless in other areas of her life, and the HOA presidency was her way of feeling important. Maybe she'd always been a controlling person, and the position just amplified her worst traits. Or maybe she genuinely believed she was helping the neighborhood and couldn't see how toxic her behavior had become. In the end, it didn't really matter. Her motivations didn't excuse her actions. She'd made choices, and those choices had consequences. The summer monsoon season arrived, bringing with it the inevitable power outages. True to form, a massive storm rolled through Phoenix one evening in July, knocking out electricity to half the city. I went to my garage, wheeled out my generator, and fired it up. The familiar hum of the engine was comforting, a reminder of reliability in uncertain times. Several neighbors were running their generators too. We'd formed a sort of informal generator club, helping each other with maintenance tips and sharing fuel when supplies ran low. It was the kind of community cooperation that Patricia had fostered as HOA president. Bill Henderson walked over with a flashlight as I was checking the connections. "Generators running great," he observed. "Best $1,000 I ever spent," I said. "Well, technically I guess it cost me more than that when you factor in the legal fees, but you know what I mean," Bill laughed. "That generator paid for itself with the settlement. You came out ahead. True enough." We stood there in the darkness, the generator humming between us, and watched the lightning flash across the sky. The storm was beautiful in its power, nature's reminder that humans weren't really in control of anything despite our best efforts. "You ever hear what happened to Karen?" Bill asked. "No, did you?" "Ran into someone who knew her at the hardware store last week. Apparently she moved to Flagstaff, bought a house that's not part of any HOA." "That's probably for the best," I said. "For her and for whoever would have been her neighbors." "Agreed." The power came back on about 2 hours later. I shut down the generator, cleaned it up, and returned it to its place in the garage. As I closed the garage door, I patted the machine affectionately. It had been through a lot, this generator. It had survived a false police report, become evidence in a lawsuit, and emerged as a symbol of justice prevailing over malice. Life continued its normal pace after that. I went to work, came home, maintained my house, and enjoyed the peaceful neighborhood. The lawsuit became a story I told at parties, a bizarre episode that people found both entertaining and outrageous. Everyone who heard it had the same reaction: disbelief that someone would file a false police report over something so petty, followed by satisfaction that I'd held her accountable. I never forgot the lesson, though. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable or expensive or time-consuming. Because letting bullies win doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone around you. By standing up to Karen, I'd not only defended my own reputation, but also created space for others to live without fear of unreasonable harassment. The $10,000 judgment had been spent on practical things: paying off Sandra's fees, buying that new lawnmower, making some home improvements, and putting the rest into savings. But the real value wasn't in the money. It was in the knowledge that justice was possible, that truth mattered, and that ordinary people could hold those who abused their power accountable. As I reflected on everything one quiet evening, sitting on my patio with a cold drink and watching the sunset, I realized how much I'd grown through the experience. I'd learned about defamation law, the court system, the importance of documentation, and the power of standing firm on principle. I'd also learned about community, about how one person's courage could inspire others, and about how toxic leadership could poison an entire neighborhood while good leadership could heal it. My generator, that simple red and black machine, had been at the center of it all. Karen had tried to weaponize it against me, to turn my prudent emergency preparation into evidence of criminality. Instead, her lie had exposed her own malice and led to her accountability. There was a certain poetic justice in that. The neighborhood thrived under Patricia's leadership. Property values actually increased, which realtors attributed to the improved community atmosphere. More families with young children moved in, drawn by the friendly environment. The neighborhood park saw regular use, with weekend gatherings becoming common. It was everything an HOA should foster: cooperation, community, and mutual respect. I sometimes wondered if Karen ever regretted what she'd done. Did she lie awake at night thinking about how her petty vendetta had cost her $10,000 and her home? Did she recognize that her own actions had brought about her downfall? Or did she still see herself as a victim, unfairly persecuted for trying to do her job? I'd never know, and honestly, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd done the right thing. I'd stood up for myself, used the legal system appropriately, and achieved justice. The outcome had benefited not just me but the entire community. As the first anniversary of the police visit approached, I decided to throw a small party. I invited the neighbors who'd supported me through the ordeal: Bill Henderson, Tom Ramirez, Angela Stewart, and a few others. Patricia Jennings came too, bringing her famous potato salad. We gathered in my backyard on a pleasant Saturday evening. I'd set up tables, grilled burgers and hot dogs, and made sure there was plenty of cold drinks. As the sun set and the conversation flowed, Bill raised his bottle. "A toast," he said, "to Derek for having the courage to stand up to a bully, and to all of us for being part of a real community." Everyone raised their drinks, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. This was what mattered: good people, good neighbors, and the knowledge that we looked out for each other. Later that evening, as people were leaving, Patricia pulled me aside. "You know, the HOA board has been talking," she said. "We'd like you to consider joining as a member. We could use someone with your principles and your willingness to stand up for what's right." I was surprised by the offer. After everything that had happened, I'd assumed I'd want nothing to do with HOA leadership. But as I thought about it, I realized it made sense. Who better to ensure the HOA stayed on the right track than someone who'd experienced firsthand what happened when it went wrong? "Let me think about it," I said. "Take your time. The offer's open whenever you're ready." Over the following weeks, I did think about it. Being on the HOA board would mean attending regular meetings, dealing with disputes, and making decisions that affected the whole community. It would be work, unpaid work at that. But it would also be an opportunity to ensure that what had happened with Karen never happened again. I accepted the position 2 months later. My first act as a board member was to propose a new policy. Any complaints filed by the HOA or its members had to be documented in writing with specific evidence attached. No more vague accusations or personal vendettas disguised as community protection. Everything had to be transparent and fact-based. The policy passed unanimously. My generator remained in the garage, ready for the next emergency, but it had become more than just a backup power source. It was a reminder of an important chapter in my life, a symbol of the day I decided not to be a victim. Every time I looked at it, I remembered the lesson: stand up for yourself, document everything, and never let bullies win. The story could have ended differently. I could have accepted the police visit as an unfortunate misunderstanding and moved on. Karen would have continued her reign of petty tyranny, and the neighborhood would have remained a place where people feared their HOA president rather than working with her. But I'd chosen a different path, one that required effort and courage, but ultimately led to a better outcome for everyone. As I sat in my first official HOA board meeting, looking around at Patricia and the other members, all of us working together to make our community better, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The $10,000 had been nice, but this sense of purpose and community was the real prize. Karen's false accusation had inadvertently given me a gift: the opportunity to transform not just my own situation, but the entire neighborhood. Her malice had backfired spectacularly, leading not to my downfall but to my rise as a community leader and to her own exile from the place she tried to control. Justice, I learned, wasn't just about court judgments and damage awards. It was about making things right, about creating systems that protected people from abuse, and about having the courage to stand up when something wrong happened. It was about documentation, evidence, and the rule of law. And sometimes, it was about a simple generator that refused to be turned into false evidence of a crime. I'd sued Karen Mitchell for defamation and won $10,000 in damages. But more importantly, I'd won my reputation back, helped create a better community, and learned that ordinary people could achieve justice when they stood firm on principle. That was worth far more than any monetary judgment. The generator hummed quietly in my memory, a reminder that sometimes the smallest things become catalysts for the greatest changes. And as I left that first board meeting, walking home under the Arizona stars, I knew that I'd made the right choice in fighting back. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever been bullied by someone in a position of petty power. Justice had been served, the community had been healed, and life in Sunset Ridge had never been better. All because I'd refused to let a lie stand unchallenged and a bully go unpunished. That was the real victory, the one that would last long after the $10,000 was spent, and the memory of Karen Mitchell had faded into neighborhood legend.